Hello class, Emily Casterline here again, and today I will be discussing why I think preaching is important, especially when it comes to the kingdom of God. Now, when you think of preaching, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? Where do we usually come into contact with preaching? Usually at church, maybe sometimes a wacky guy on a soapbox on the side of the street in the middle of the city. But preaching is one of the most important tools that God has given us as the Christian church, to spread the gospel. Now, sometimes when we're at church, I'm sure we've had those days where we are falling asleep because the week was so hard. Sometimes we hear the word and we're like, yeah, it's good, nothing special. And then there are other times where we drink it up and it fills our soul and it answers questions and brings light to problems in our lives that we are struggling with that day. It is absolutely important to have a well-rounded and biblical preaching, especially at church. I remember in my church in Xiamen, China, there we were going through the Old Testament, which is great because we had many young believers, and that tends to be a weakness, to be ignorant of the Old Testament and the richness of the history of Christianity. However, there were two Sundays, 2 weeks in a row where Jesus was not even mentioned. And that caused a great stir in the church, and we rectified that situation immediately. But preaching always must be not exactly monitored, but in a way it must be holding what is true. And without Christ, there is no new covenant, and without Christ rising from the dead, our faith is useless, because there would be no reason to trust in him and to live apart from the law without the blood of Christ covering us. Now, I believe preaching is important for two reasons. One, first, it is the way that God has given us to share the gospel. I believe Paul described it perfectly later in the book of Romans. This is from Romans chapter 10, verses 13 through 15. For whoever will call on the name of the Lord will be saved. How then will they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how will they believe in him whom they have not heard? And how will they hear without a preacher? And how will they preach unless they are sent? Just as it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring the good news, who brings good news of good things. That is ever so important. Darkness cannot be brought to the light. Darkness cannot be chased out of someone's life. The principalities of evil cannot be pushed back without the illumination of truth and what is good. Without that confrontation, there is no way for people to become free of the imprisonment of sin. The second point is God uses preaching to convict his children, and also to stretch us and help us grow in better relationship with him, in deeper knowledge, in greater faith. And those are uncomfortable situations, and we as humans are meant to live in a community, and we cannot grow as well, and we cannot grow healthily if we are living our lives by ourselves. We must have the community of Christians to encourage us, because the observation of someone outside of our lives, they can see our struggles and they have different ideas to help us to improve and to keep us accountable to live for God and God alone. So first point, preaching is a tool to share the gospel. And second point, preaching is used to convict God's children of sin and to stretch us in faith. When God gives us tools, he gives them for a reason. And we as his children should be wise and be good stewards of what he's given us, because he has given us tools for a reason and he has trusted us for a reason. Now, how does that tool apply to our life? Remember Stephen from Acts 6-7. He was ordained as a deacon, which meant he was a servant. His job in the church was to do. However, he was still preaching the gospel and he was still bold. So all Christians are called to preach the gospel or teach the gospel. However, not everyone has that leadership role in the church. We are all accountable to share the light, to be the light on the hill to those who live around us, whether they are children of God or whether they are of the world. And God has given us this responsibility for a reason. Thank you for listening, and I hope you all are having a good week.